my channel. Welcome back to another video. I'm Jessie E. This is Ravenclaw, and you're watching As we all know, September is finally gone and October is here. So let's put September behind us by talking about all of the books that I have read this past month. The first book that I finished in September was Not That Bad by Roxane Gay. So Not That Bad is a collection of essays written by women, trans folks, and a couple men talking about their experiences with sexual assault, sexual violence, and rape culture as a whole. Each of the essays are uniquely distinct from one another, and not just because their content varies so much. Some of them talk about street harassment, others sexual violence that they experienced and endured in their own households. All of the essays are distinctly unique and capture a different element of what it's like to live in a society that perpetuates rape culture and is controlled by the patriarchy. This book is really special to me because it was the first time I had ever read a novel where multiple people talked about having experienced the same thing. It really helped to remind me that sexual violence is truly a worldwide epidemic and that anyone is capable of experiencing it. I'm so grateful that I read this book, even though there were so many times that I found myself crying throughout turning the pages, because I realized that these were voices I really needed to hear. I not only learned a lot while reading this book, but I also healed while reading it. We spend so much time silencing survivors, saying that what they experienced wasn't that bad or that they don't have the tools to accurately describe what they went through. And I thought it was so powerful that these survivors stood up against what they suffered and submitted these essays so that we could hear about their experiences. In today's political climate, it is absolutely necessary that we be listening and hearing the perspectives of victims, and I'm so glad that I read this book. Although the subject matter is incredibly difficult to swallow, I really encourage literally everyone to read this book, especially men. No one goes unaffected by it, and I really appreciated that there was an essay where a male talked about his experience being a victim of toxic masculinity and how it has changed him for the worst ways. It's also important to note that the essays, in addition to including women, trans folks, and men, also included women of color. And so often, the voices of women of color are shut out in conversations about sexual violence because so many of us think that women of color are somehow impervious to harm. I also appreciated that Roxane Gay included essays from people who are well known in the public eye. Actress Gabrielle Union submitted an essay that absolutely broke my heart while reading it, but I appreciated that celebrity voices were included in this book because for many of us, we think of celebrities as our gods, and we don't realize that they too are susceptible to violence. I also read The Perfect Family by Samantha King, which came out in 2017. I deserve a medal for finishing this book because it was awful. So the story is about Maddie Castle, who has 10-year-old twins, Annabelle and Aiden. And on the day of the twins' 10th birthday, a man breaks into her home and makes her choose a child to kill. The book is supposedly supposed to be about the aftermath of her choice and how it affects her perfect family. Now, the really sick premise of this book is what drew me in and got me to read it initially, but that is absolutely not what the story is about. So besides the fact that I was annoyed by the misleading nature of the book, I found the writing itself to be lacking. I found her metaphors to be cheap and cheesy, and then the story itself wasn't interesting. We're not given much about Maddie Castle as a character, and so even by the end of the book, I still had no real reason to give a shit about her. On top of that, the plot was very, very easy to figure out. It was super clear early on who the true villain in the story was. And that wouldn't have been such a problem if I had enjoyed reading the story along the way, but I did not. There were some really creepy Lolita fetishy references to her 10-year-old daughter Annabelle, which I quite frankly didn't appreciate. At one point, Samantha King spent 2 full pages describing how beautiful and ethereal this 10-year-old girl was, and how grown men were attracted and enthralled by her. It just creeped me the fuck out. Maddie Castle's family is rumored to have absolutely everything. A perfect marriage, excellent kids, a beautiful house, but you find out really, really quickly in the book that all of that is a lie, and so you aren't allowed to spend any time being enveloped in this fantasy of a perfect family. So by the time the illusion is shattered, you're like, yeah, I know, they sucked. I think it would have been really awesome if Samantha King had spent time getting us to believe the illusion that Maddie Castle truly had a charmed life, because then it would have been that much more creepy when that illusion was shattered to the reader and then you were finally allowed to discover the truth. I think I gave this book 2 stars on Goodreads simply because there were a few instances and plot twists that I was like, oh, I didn't see that coming, and they were really well written. But honestly, I would give it a 1 star, and I don't recommend anybody read this book. But what truly saved me was reading The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. I picked up this book right after The Perfect Family, and it couldn't have come at a better time. I actually filmed an entire video devoted to talking and gushing about this book because it was 10 out of 10, the best book I've read out of all of 2018. And I know that the year isn't over, but you can't change my mind. So I will link that video down below in case you're interested in watching me gush over this book for like 10 minutes. And I go way more into depth into the plot and characters than I'm about to do so now. But just to rehash, because I really want everyone to go get this book, it is about Elma Wexler, who is a brilliant pilot physicist genius living in 1952. A meteorite devastates the world and wipes out pretty much all of the east coast of the United States, taking Elma's family with it. But the family that she has left is her beautiful husband Nathaniel, who's also a brilliant and gifted scientist. Now, most of the nation's scientific leaders were based in the East, which makes Elma and her husband Nathaniel the top experts in physics and rocket science. They end up being drawn into NASA's program because due to the greenhouse effect that the meteorite has sparked, Earth will become uninhabitable within 50 or 60 years. Elma is the one who runs these calculations and finds out that the greenhouse effect will soon make the Earth uninhabitable. But of course, no one wants to believe her because how could a lowly woman come up with such complicated information? She spends a lot of the book having to pass information through her husband so that he can parrot it and present it as his idea because people are so sexist. I mean, it's 1952 and no one is willing to believe that a woman can come up with information that is critical to the survival of the planet. And while Elma is running the calculations that are putting these men on the moon, she knows that she's more than qualified to be out there exploring the universe for herself. She starts a club of geniusly talented women who also have the same dream. But Elma soon realizes that different women face different struggles, and while she is being held back simply because she's a woman, she realizes that other women beside her are being held back because of their race and because of their gender. Elma's character grows so much throughout the story, and it's excellent to watch her develop because she's not only brilliant, but deeply compassionate and wonderful. I loved all of the science and calculations that are strewn throughout the pages of this novel. It was so exciting, and also this is literally the most realistic sci-fi book I've ever read in my life. This is the first book in the series. I believe there's 2 in total, and this book covers the span of 6 years. Things in the book happen interestingly but slowly, and I really appreciated that because there's nothing quick about activism and making social progress. Key political figures are referenced in the book or included. Think about MLK and General Eisenhower. And I just love historical reimaginings or when a book mingles with what's actually happened in the real life. It makes me feel like the book is that much more real and relatable. But despite that she has big dreams and an IQ that many of us can't relate to, she is a relatable character. I also read The Incendiaries by R.O. Kwon. A lot of people were raving about this book on Bookstagram, and so I picked it up from the local library to see what it was all about. It tells the story of Will and Phoebe. Both are young students attending a very prestigious college, and Will falls in love with Phoebe pretty much at first sight. But Phoebe herself has a really troubled past and gets wrapped up in a violent cult. Will spends most of the book trying to pull her out of the cult before it's too late. The book switches vantage points between Will and Phoebe, and it's one of the most eloquent and beautifully written books that I've ever read. It's also pretty short. It was like 224 pages, and I finished it in a matter of 6 hours. Sometimes the book is narrated from the aspect of the cult leader, whose name is John Leal, and I really wish we could have gotten into his brain a little bit better. Yes, Phoebe does suffer tremendous guilt over feeling responsible for the death of her mother, and I think that's a really good motivation for a cult leader to prey upon and indoctrinate her into his group, but it still just wasn't quite enough for me. It felt like something was missing. While R.O. Kwon did an excellent job of writing an interesting and complex book, I absolutely hated Will, and I feel like the faults of his character were never truly examined. He definitely romanticizes Phoebe as his manic pixie dream girl, and I think that Phoebe accepts this because she feels like that's all that she deserves. Okay, I'm gonna reveal a mini spoiler about the book, so if you plan on reading it, skip to the time posted below, but I just have to talk about this. I think that because Will doesn't truly love or see Phoebe for the person that she is, that's the reason why she doesn't allow Will to rescue her from the cult. She feels like she doesn't deserve to truly be understood, and that the only love that she is capable of accepting is the love of a man who fetishizes and romanticizes her. R.O. Kwon introduces really complex topics but doesn't effectively examine them in her text, and that is something that I can't move past within this book. So if you're the kind of person who can read a book and is okay without having a lot of closure, a lot of realization of themes that are happening, and you prefer books that are a little bit subtle, I think that you'll enjoy this. It just was a little bit too obscure for me. After The Incendiaries, I read 6 out of 7 by Jess Mowry. This book is actually really personal to me because, okay, story time. So I was a really precocious kid and I read constantly. So my mother had this friend named Leon, and he noticed that I was always reading, and because of that, my speech was just at a higher level than most kids my age. And so one day he came into our house and gave me this book, and he said that it's a beautiful story that he believes I'm smart enough to understand. Now, on top of being precocious, I was also a very proud child, and anytime anyone issues a challenge, I felt I had to rise to the occasion. So I started to read this book at 6 years old. This book is not written for a 6-year-old. This is the most inappropriate book anyone could ever give to a 6-year-old. I actually got to page 40 before finally putting this book down and giving up, and I'm super glad that I did because I think I would have been traumatized if I had finished this book as a child. So to get into the review, 6 out of 7 is about young black boys growing up in the inner city. Corbett Wainwright is a brilliant 13-year-old child living in rural Missouri in the 1990s. He's been devastated by the fact that his father was unjustly arrested and shipped off to prison for a year. So the reason Corbett's father was shipped off is because he stood up to a white pedophile who has been kidnapping and abusing black children in the neighborhood for decades. Corbett loves to read and develops an understanding of the oppression that he is experiencing in Bridgeend, and he starts to dream about getting out. Eventually, he hops on a bus and travels to Oakland, California, where he meets Lactamian. There are a lot of differences between Lactamian and Corbett. While Corbett is shy, incredibly tall, and black as midnight, Lactamian is super obese, really funny, outgoing, and also involved in a gang. Meanwhile, the black community in Oakland has been absolutely devastated by the introduction of crack into their neighborhood. Everywhere Corbett turns, there are 8-year-olds prostituting themselves for drugs or being prostituted, and everybody that he knows is either selling crack or using it. At every possible turn, the police are showing up in their neighborhood and beating and abusing the kids who live there. Needing protection, Corbett joins Lactamian's gang and struggles to find a way to survive. So this book is full of different characters, and many of them are anti-heroes whose motivations are very easy to accept and understand. I loved that Corbett and Lactamian remained constant throughout the book, and while they were involved in gangs, they were only there for the element of protection and never once did anything that was cruel or unjust. Their parents and the police aren't there to protect them, and the school system that they might turn to is full of its own abuses and horrors. On top of that, you can't trust your own people, and your community has been ravaged by crack cocaine. It was both heartwarming and heartbreaking to watch Corbett understand what it meant to be black in America, and it absolutely enraged me that he wasn't allowed or entitled to have the same beautiful coming-of-age story that we get to read in white children's young adult fiction. I don't think I'll ever have the stomach to read this book again. I'm still glad that I read it in the first place, because apartheid education still exists in the United States, and there are kids in New York and in California who still live this way. That aside, this book is brilliantly written. It's one of the most complex and well-developed pieces of literature that I've ever read, and I feel like it's definitely on par with Richard Wright's Native Son. I've never read a book that was more thematic and full of symbolism than this one. Bates, for example, is a symbol of white oppression, and crows are used constantly throughout the story to symbolize black bodies in America. I had long ago forgotten about having started to read this book, and I was browsing in the library a month and a half ago, and I just saw it standing there on the shelf, so I took it home. And I wish I could thank Leon for looking at me and thinking that I was able to effectively examine the themes and content of this book at 6 years old, because it says that he must have really seen a lot in me. And I wish I could thank him for that. Even if you push aside everything that I've told you about this book, at the end of the day, it's also a novel about blackness and black power. Corbett is frequently told throughout the book by white people that despite how intelligent, brilliant, and compassionate he is, he will never be as good as a white boy. And reading a character like Corbett who is able to examine those words and throw them back and reject them would have been so important and empowering for me as a black kid. Those were words that I too heard when I was Corbett's age, and unfortunately, I believed them. And so it's weird because I didn't enjoy this book at all. I mean, there's no way to enjoy a book that is so full of trauma and child abuse. but despite that, I still ended up giving it 5 stars. Okay, so it's gonna be super weird to go from talking about 6 Out 7 to Circe by Madeline Miller, but here we go. Also, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing Circe correctly. I don't know anything about mythology besides what I read in this book. Let me know if I'm saying her name wrong, but I mean, I'm probably gonna mispronounce all of the names I'm gonna reference in this book, so fuck it. Circe is the daughter of Titan sun god Helios and the beautiful nymph Perse. But she is born much less beautiful than her siblings and becomes cast aside by her family. She's already seen as a disadvantage by her parents for having been born a girl, and on top of that, she doesn't have any powers. So her family has absolutely no reason to care about her as incredibly powerful, beautiful people. I'm sorry, not people, they're gods. However, as she grows older, Circe discovers that she does have a power of her own. She is a witch. While not outright banned, sorcery is incredibly discouraged because it's the one thing that threatens the gods and their power. The almighty Zeus is threatened by Circe's power and orders that she be banished to an island called Aiaia. Again, probably pronounced that wrong. But in the hundreds of years Circe spends in her banishment, she begins to craft her power and become even stronger. During her banishment, she collides with famous mythological figures like Daedalus, Athena, and Apollo. Much of Circe's life is spent being dominated and abused by various men and gods, and I loved watching her character come into itself and begin to reject all of those experiences. When she is banished to Aiaia, she begins to discover for the first time what it truly means to have power. And I don't just mean power over others, but power over herself and her autonomy. The way she illustrates and animates these famous mythological figures makes me wish that I had known more about them when I started reading this book. I love all of the metaphors that she uses to describe difficult to swallow concepts like the passing of time to someone who is immortal. Madeline Miller is a fantastic world builder and an even better writer. There's so much that I would love to say about this story, but doing so would give you spoilers, and I don't want to do that. I just think you should read it for yourself. I gave this book 5 stars, and I was going to give it 4 because I felt that Madeline Miller had Circe spend a little too much time wrapped up in her love affairs with men. I thought that it took away from her character. I talked with Justin, who runs Ghost Reader, and he made a really good point about while yes, Circe does spend a lot of time in love with men, she isn't defined by her love of them. And once he said that, I realized that that was completely true. Plus, I think it says a lot that after everything and all the abuse that Circe went through at the hands of gods and men, she's still able to love. Who can guess what the next book is? Yeah, it's this one. Let's just get into the plot of the book. It's about Rachel Chu, who agrees to spend the summer in China with her 2-year boyfriend, Nick. When she gets to China, she is stunned to find out that Nick is rich. But not just rich, he's unfathomably wealthy. She comes to realize that his family does not want her there and that they only see her as a backstabbing gold digger. Now, what makes the story really interesting is that it's detailing the private lives of the Asian wealthy elite. In addition to being a fun, comical, and entertaining read, the book is full of complex cultural Chinese references that are translated at the bottom of the pages. Here's an example. You'll see like an asterisk, and then you'll see an asterisk in the text, and then if you scroll, what the hell? And then if you look down to the bottom of the page, that asterisk will be explained in a way that English speakers can understand. The book is told in third person, and I'm just not a fan of omnipotent narration. I find third person makes it difficult to get into a character's mind, and that was definitely the case. After 500 pages, I still didn't care for Nick or Rachel. I thought it was pretty shitty that Nick didn't warn Rachel about his family and how cutthroat they could be. Maybe I would have liked Nick and Rachel a little bit more if Kevin Kwan had spent more time developing their characters as individuals or even as establishing why they were a couple. I don't know what Nick's hobbies are, what he does in his spare time, and I don't know the same for Rachel either. And that fact makes their characters pretty boring and unrelatable. I found Nick's cousin Astrid to be a much more interesting character, and I loved when the book was focused on her perspective. That being said, I really enjoyed the world building in this book. I thought it was fantastically researched, well written, and very, very entertaining. It's time to talk about a graphic novel. I'm devastated I didn't have more time to read the graphic novels that I hauled in my September video, but I am glad that the only one that I was able to read was Motor Crush. I didn't imagine that I would enjoy Motor Crush as much as I did. And I'm super embarrassed by my speculation in my haul video about what this comic was gonna be about because I was way off. This is a book I actually don't know anything about. It's called Motor Crush. I know that it's about a girl bicycle gang that are are defending themselves and living life and getting to know each other and forming this like really intense sisterhood.
Sure, Jan.
So the book is about a talented young racer named Domino. She lives in Nova Honda, which is the racing capital of the world. She's amazingly illustrated by Babs Tarr. She wears awesome piercings, has a few tattoos, wears her hair cropped short. To match, she has a fantastic sense of style and a witty humor that's impossible not to love. When she's not racing in the World Grand Prix, she's participating in illegal street racing at night against rival bike gangs. These races are incredibly dangerous, and it's encouraged for you to attack and knock rival racers off of their bikes. All of this night racing is done to try and obtain illegal samples of a drug called Crush, which is an engine boosting stimulant that can make your motorbike incredibly fast. At first, I was a little put off that Domino is using illegal accelerants to gain her fame in the World Grand Prix. Then it is discovered that Domino is not using Crush for her bike at all, and she has an ulterior private motive for her use of this accelerant. She's gonna knock my pumpkins down. And there they go. Thanks, Raven. I was absolutely sold on the comic once her love interest Lola was introduced. Lola used to be a mechanic at Domino's shop before she and Domino had a falling out as a result of their mysterious breakup. Brendan Fletcher does not take the time to carefully explain everything that's going on in the plot, and so you just have to discern and figure it out for yourself. When I started reading the book, I thought that I had somehow picked up volume 2 and that I was missing something, or that these characters had been introduced in a prior comic series that I didn't know about, and that was freaking awesome. I hate when writers over-explain the plot. I'm also super into the art style. It's slightly cartoonish and reminds me of FLCL or Fully Kali. I'm never sure how to pronounce that. I finished this graphic novel in one day. I just freaking devoured it, and I can't wait to pick up volume 2, which I'm gonna do once this video wraps up. The last book that I read for September was What We Were Promised by Lucy Tan. Ow. Are you gonna be nice? Why won't you love me? The novel is about the lives of Wei, his wife Lena, and their maid. Stop! Wei and Lena had an arranged marriage that took... I can't with my cat. God damn it. When they were kids, Wei and Lena's parents arranged that they would be married in their small Chinese village. As young adults, they married as promised and moved to New York City, where they made their wealth, and then moved back to China, where they settled in the beautiful city of Shanghai. Sunny also comes from a small Chinese village and moves to Shanghai in hopes of having more opportunities than were afforded by her small town. Much too young, she was pressured into marriage, and when her husband died 6 months into their union, she saw that as an opportunity to move to Shanghai and claim her life. What are you doing? While Sunny is now in her mid-30s, she knows that she doesn't want to be married and that she doesn't want to have kids, but she still isn't quite sure of what she wants. Wei and Lena offer her a job as nanny to their 13-year-old daughter, Karen. She graciously accepts, seeing the opportunity as a way to gain more money and potentially more control over her life. Wei and Lena seem to have the perfect marriage, but Lena has been hiding her growing distaste over being just a housewife. She never told Wei that she was in love with his brother, who disappeared more than 10 years ago after being involved with gangs. When Wang's brother Qiang shows up at their doorstep after 10 years and asks for forgiveness, Wei, Lena, and Sunny are thrown into a tizzy, and they are forced to examine their past, present, and futures. I came very close to putting this book on the shelf permanently because I was getting really annoyed by the third person narrating, and I felt like the story was incredibly small and narrow plotted. The only reason I persisted with this book was because I was stunned by how elegantly it was written. Lucy Tan is an excellent and beautifully illustrative author. It's a great thing that I continued with it too, because Lucy Tan managed to find a way to make third-person narrating not so stifling. The ending of the book is what really shook me. It didn't at all end the way that I had predicted. Lena and Sunny's characters in particular are the ones that truly opened up and impressed me. And there were some really cool twists and mic drops that happened in the book that I wasn't expecting at all. All in all, I would probably give this book 4.5 stars. It turned out so much better than I expected, and I can't wait to see what else Lucy Tan comes up with, because she really has impressed me as a writer. And that is everything that I read in September. I'm super excited to give you my Spooktober video, and that is coming out tomorrow. I'll be talking about the market's creepiest comics, which I'll be reading for October, as well as the market's scariest books. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.